Hi, welcome to a nuanced meditation ASMR exercise. I know that I talk about nuance quite often, and usually the impression is that I have a negative view of nuance existing, or perhaps not existing. It will not surprise you that I have a nuanced appreciation and frustration with nuance. But I want to share a guided thought process of optimism and empowerment. When you sit down at your desk and put your hands on your mouse and keyboard, think about how you have a unique experience warming your muscles to touch the way that you can bring your thoughts, ideas, and work to your computer or tablet or pencil and paper, or you may end up just looking at the screen. But regardless of what happens and how you feel about how it goes, it is a brave thing to ever want to do things, to try to do them, to notice the many small things that get in your way, to not notice all the many things that could have gotten in your way, to lean against the decay and selfishness of the rest of the universe, to keep your soul intact just a little bit longer, and strive to do anything, or perhaps strive to allow yourself to do nothing. Everything that you have a thought about is more worthy of being considered than you can appreciate. And it may feel nuanced, the degree to which you can appreciate other people and their positive or negative comments towards you. But it all relates back to an extremely complex experience that is not just uniquely yours, but uniquely complex to appreciate at the deepest level. I wonder, honestly, whether the appreciation of nuance and complexity, whether trying to simplify so many different things going on, the thoughts, the feelings, the way that we make sense of what we did do, what other people did. And I think it is very nuanced whether there is a serious utility to that kind of thinking. But if it brings you some happiness, especially if it feels rather involuntary, then I think that's more than justified to allow yourself to see the silver lining and a very nuanced anisotrophic effect on that signal lining. It's jagged, and every positive is not consistently a positive. Often having a positive feeling about something can provoke a negative internal reaction to worrying about whether you're compensating for a deep insecurity or overcompensating in the same way, but more negatively as some sort of arrogant or dysfunctional behavior. I think on some level we know that it's not nearly so simple as that either. I think that it's a good way to simplify and draw the nuance out of a situation, to react to different buzzwords and try to come up with a firm reasoning or feeling that you don't belong in the categories you don't want to belong in, or perhaps in fear that you do, strike out with some more intentional action to prove to yourself or to prove to any internal or external critics that you are not this way in at least this action or intention. You may feel a nuanced resistance to act reactively, but I think even all that, even if it was as simple as doing things, having feelings, reacting to the feelings with generic labels, casting off from those generic labels with increasingly specific actions, even though that may seem more passive and less owning of being the progenitor of those actions and owning the consequences that come, whether deserved or not, because there is a nuance to consequences, and I respect the empowerment of doing things and accepting more personal control or accountability over something that is not within your control, but it remains to be seen whether choosing feelings that resist ownership is better than embracing illusory seeming feelings that welcome it as part of the life that you choose. And that may or may not be discouraging, but I do think there is a lot of pleasure both across the mental stimulation of considering thoughts with such a level of unproductive nuance that there's quite a significant chance you have had a genuinely unique experience. It may or may not be valuable to you to experience things or thoughts in a unique way, but I think it's likely that you have. And I think it's also likely that you're worried that you haven't. I think you should tell yourself that you probably have, and that you might not be ready to hear it from yourself, but it was worth a try. And even if that never succeeds, and the good things that happen feel disconnected from your actions and intentions, and the bad things turn out to be against your intentions and actions, that's okay also. On one hand, you can contemplate all sorts of simplified ways of doing things that make sense, and you can go out and do them and be frustrated or energized by what that could mean about future actions, or whether it validates some actions or feelings of the past. There's really so much surface to break through in terms of ways to interpret or feel about things. I personally think quite a lot about the nuance of nuance. And what I mean by that is, does thinking about all of the exceptions to a way that you've been thinking about something, does it empower people? Does it empower me? Does it empower you? Or is it promoting feelings of anxiety and self-criticism? I think maybe it's most likely to multiply both. I think appreciating nuance gives you space to be curious about things you have done, things other people have done, what you thought about them, what they thought about them, and ideally gives you the freedom to interpret things how you want to, not purely for self-gain, but for your own continued self-allegiance and decision-making. This might seem like a bunch of words that don't make any sense. That's very possible. I can appreciate the nuance of listening to this many words and realizing there's not very much direction at all, other than that I'm saying exceptions exist, and because exceptions exist, maybe the things you want to be true are truer than you can make yourself feel them. And it's possible that could be very toxic as well as empowering. Ideally, when you embrace the empowering side of nuance, you also gain some sort of appreciation or sensitivity to the other side, which is probably a lot darker. If you see exceptions where other people see rules, you are most likely going to be insensitive seeming when you listen to people, because people often struggle with the feelings that they share and are most sensitive about. And if you see many sub-properties, or even just have feelings that tangent you off, it's adding a layer of nuance that the person was not focusing on within their own experience. It may or may not be more relevant or less relevant, more true or less true, more compelling or less compelling. But there is a beauty in seeing a slightly different personalized version of something compared to the way another person sees all of those experiences. I can't say for sure that your listening will be enhanced by generating a creative prompt of interpretations and tangent ideas while listening to someone. It's most likely to be slightly irritating to the person, though it may extend your attention span in the general direction a good deal longer. It's hard to say, since for the most part appreciating nuance is a tiring spinning of the mind. But I think the mind does yearn to be used even when no useful, productive purpose can be found. It may be ideal to push back against the restlessness. Certainly, most of us could appreciate a bit more calm in our minds. But if we appreciate the nuance of generating nuance, which is that it's a tiring practice for the mind, then it could also be interpreted as a form of exercise and multitasking. Generally, people are not appreciative of being multitasked when they're explaining feelings, and that is understandable. But people are often also self-critical when they are sharing feelings. They feel guilty for putting any sort of a burden, no matter how appropriate, on other people. So perhaps appreciating the nuance will empower them to rise above their guilt, that having you hear them and validate them in some way, and balance that with the fact that you're having your own ideas about their experience and how you would feel if you were in their experience in some way. And that frustration they might have with you may feel unfair, and it could be unfair. It could also be very fair. It doesn't necessarily present which way it should be interpreted, and that is one of the nuances of this. But regardless, sometimes allowing someone to be frustrated at you, even if you are doing something that is a way of interacting with the world in your own unique way, surely it's worth thinking to yourself that if you're having a unique appreciation of someone's experience, even if they can't appreciate your appreciation, and maybe your appreciation goes in a direction that is hurtful for that person, it seems worth noting that having a unique experience inspired by another person is a worthwhile thing. It might seem sad that you could pay for that worthwhile thing with disregard or criticism, but you might even appreciate the nuance within all of that, which is being criticized for having wandering thoughts is not an obviously correct, directionally or otherwise thing to do. There are plenty of reasons to engage with people and plenty of reasons not to. Finding your own nuance often means coming up with ways to interact with the world that are validating to you internally. So in a sense, rejecting that which is generic or simplified or shared is also a emboldenment of the things that could be unique or important to you. They may not be, and there is some nuance to seeking or openness to the thematic quest of thoughts that are both yours in a personal fashion, but also not deeply resonating within you. Sometimes we do have thoughts that there is nothing we can do with. We can certainly discard them, but we can also interact with them with a level of nuance and curiosity. Sometimes we generate truly cursed thoughts, not purely for suffering, but so that we can appreciate a part of ourselves in some other way without immediately calling ourselves to the literal action or interpretation. It is a meditation that almost requires disregard or perhaps a level of skepticism, because coming up with new ideas is not obviously better than referencing the ideas that you already know or perhaps already believe. But at the same time, there is always that chance that when you dive into the nuance of a situation or a circumstance or a person, that you will arrive at something that is not just detailed in a different way, but resonates on a deeper level that may or may not last. But I think that emotional experience is very valuable. I think oftentimes restlessness is due less with a lack of motivation and more a lack of actualization. Sure, I know directionally sometimes what I want to do or what I need to do, but I truly often wish that it was easier to feel the actualization in the moment, feeling that not just with every click or key press or, save or export that I was resonating with what I was doing, but much more nuanced with every breath, with every prickle of hairs on your skin against the air flowing from the AC unit, or a little bit of light scattering from your screen or from the lights, that spot on your desk that you look at for a while and maybe appreciate the nuance in a chained way to the point where well, why do I always look at this spot? I'm looking at this hole in the wall next to my desk monitor where I screwed in a microphone holding stand, and then realized later that it was getting in the way of other things that needed to be there, so I took it out. I didn't fill in the holes with something else, so there's just 4 tiny little holes where a microphone stand used to be nailed into the wall, or perhaps screwed. I can't say for sure because I did not care that much while I pulled it off the wall. It is a bit of a sticking point for my eyes, but I don't hate it. On one hand, it could have been a cleaner surface. I could have used wood filler or painted over it even. There's a good chance that the paint that was used on this wall, which is a interesting dark blue with low saturation, could be found quite easily, and perhaps even in a mini can of paint, making it very easy to move around and fix. But there is something to the nuance of desk battle scars. I've moved so many pieces of my desk around, from mouse and keyboard to microphone, to the different monitors, to the soundboard that likely does almost nothing, to the echo in the room, to the lights, so that there's enough light for me to feel like I've gone outside, even though I have not, and enough distance or angle from the way that my computer monitors are angled so that I will not have to be fighting against the glare to see what's on my screen. There are so many fun things to look at, not just the screen, but the way the lights get on the edge of the monitors, the frame bezel that are on them, think that there is something to be said for the space, and I often find myself paralyzed and pulling myself out of the paralysis by saying, sometimes you can't predict the nuance of a desk setup or a person or a situation or the consequences of an action. You just have to do it and then see what stream of thoughts come afterwards. And then after you have some of those thoughts, you can have thoughts about those thoughts, and that might sound like an intrusive thought affirmation. Maybe that's what nuance is. Nuance is realizing there are so many ways for a single person to look at something and never really know how they should feel about it. And I think that's fair and respectable. I don't think nuance has to be interpreted in any consistent way at all. If anything, I'd like to believe that nuance encourages a state of mind which is chaotically open to absurd interpretations, not for casting down all perspectives or actions, but just for forgiveness and moving forward and a certain kind of velocity or momentum. People never give themselves enough credit for how difficult thinking is. It requires an extreme amount of effort to hold thoughts in your head, to feel feelings, and interact with other people. We often engage in a lot of self-shame because we want to be more perfected versions, the things that people want from us, more attentiveness, more consideration, more sturdiness, the ability to accept any kind of comment and react in a way that will resonate with us in the medium to long term, and not just display the emotions we are not as comfortable with in a way that makes us uncomfortable with excess. That is very respectable. I don't know whether having a unique experience with anyone or anything is inherently valuable, but it does feel or seem meaningful to me in this moment that may not be very nuanced to say that appreciating nuance is a good thing. I feel like it could be a good thing. I think something that is more draining about the nuance that you can feel is there's a subtle implication that when things are nuanced or complicated beyond your awareness or capability for awareness, if things are outside that, then how can you develop any sort of an opinion? But that lacks a lot of nuance, in my opinion. Appreciating nuance doesn't mean skepticism and self-criticism for chasing certainty or decisiveness. It means that the process is ongoing, and if you can't find nuance, then maybe you should look a little bit harder, because nuance should never tell someone that they can't do something or can't believe something. Rather, just that there are many ways to push back against anything and many ways to push forward against anything. We must all cherry pick which variants of nuance, reactions, identities, properties, settings, configurations are valuable to us, not necessarily because it resonates with a deeper idea that we find patterns of in many places, but genuinely that if we have a thought and the thought wants to stay and we want it to stay, then sometimes we can let it.